Marty, I'm really excited to host you again. So last March, we were here at Intuit to launch your book, Transform. We had this place packed. Super excited to have you back here 1 year later. Can you tell us what you're going to share advice about tonight?
It's been a busy year. We've had a lot of learnings. There's a number of things people that are trying to transform run into. I wanted to share some of the things we've heard, some of the things we're sort of responding to and really trying to dial up. Generative AI has forced the issue. Companies that weren't already thinking about transforming kind of got the memo now.
Cool. And then I got a peek to your slides and I saw founder mode mentioned. Can you give us a quick soundbite about what you can talk about there?
Founder mode is something that probably 9 out of 10 people I meet completely miss the point. And it turns out it's an extremely important point. It's one of those things that if you don't understand, you probably are not going to successfully transform.
I'm excited to have you here today.
Thanks for
I hope
inviting me.
everybody enjoys the video. This is actually Marty's 9th time speaking at Lean Product Meetup. So let's give him a hand. I love it. It's a tradition that we have usually at the beginning of the year. And I'm just kicking it back to the SNL 5-Timers Club. He's at the 9-Timers Club. Marty Cagan is a partner at Silicon Valley Product Group. He's written 3 amazing books, actually 4, because Inspired 2nd edition is like a completely different book from the 1st edition. But then he wrote Empowered for Leaders, and he wrote Transformed, which we launched a year ago. Before Silicon Valley Product Group, he worked at eBay and Netscape and HP. He's obviously a leading voice in product management. He's going to share his lessons learned and advice 1 year in on the product operating model. So please join me in giving Marty a warm welcome. Thanks, Marty.
Dan knows this, but I really like this group and kind of consider it my home meetup. You know, like Dan said, we launched the book last year, right here, and it's been a wild year. Basically, the good news for sure is I think the timing, which is really luck more than anything else. You work on these projects for a long time, but you know, generative AI kind of made it a much more pressing issue for companies. So I'd say pretty much every company I would meet, or at least considering moving how they work to kind of try to work better. But with Gen AI, I was like, yeah, if we don't do this, we're probably in big trouble. And they are also able to see the companies that have already come out with great new products using this technology, and they see they work very differently. So all that sort of lit a fire under this whole discussion. So that's been good. There were a number of things that we absolutely anticipated. If you do read the book Transform, you'll see one of the biggest sections has all the objections that we normally get, or the very big list of objections from marketing, from sales, from finance, from HR, from CEO, from all these different people, including your own engineers and stuff. So, but that said, we continue to learn. And we have been sharing what we've learned for a while. In fact, for those of you that don't know, my partner, Christian Idiotti, has Christian ever spoken here?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
He spoke remotely during COVID.
Okay. The guy is one of the most gifted speakers and storytellers I've ever met. Yeah, so if you get a chance to hear his talks, it's amazing. But he started a podcast. It's very specialized, aimed at product leaders and product coaches. It's all about coaching. That's really what we think the product leader's primary job is to coach and develop their people. So it's all focused on coaching. And most of these interviews, it's called product therapy. Most of them are about the challenges involved in transforming. And the most recent one just came out, and I think it's one of the most powerful, is all about the politics. Honestly, that's kind of the meta topic for everything with this is politics. Because really, you can't transform unless you win the hearts and minds of the leaders. And, you know, I don't mean this in a negative way, but it's politics, right? It's people. And navigating that is a real challenge. And it's not the normal, like, here's how you do product discovery, here's how you test product ideas. It's another layer on things. So very interested in that. That said, there is an issue that I would argue is the biggest of all. And that's what I wanted to talk about here. I wanted to drill in on what I think is the sort of the root issue of so many of the things that make product hard, that make becoming great hard. And for those that have been following along, you know, what was it, a few months ago, 6 months ago, something like that, Brian Chesney decided to share his thoughts and created kind of a big firestorm. He kind of opened this big can of worms. Now, in truth, he was calling something out that is a real thing, a very real thing. But he kind of didn't know that it's been a real thing for 20 years. And all that context was missing because from his point of view, it's brand new. He just learned this stuff. But it's actually a big deal. And other companies have different terms for this. But I really do think he kind of he's still learning. And there's a lot of things that I think even he is sort of walking back or rethinking. But there is a really important point in there. And most people, when you even utter the term founder mode, they immediately go to, oh, it's just licensed to micromanage, which of course is completely not the case. And in fact, the person who shined a light on Brian Chesney's talk, which honestly most of us would know, most of the world would never have known about it if it wasn't for Paul Graham, who is probably one of the best and most famous venture capitalists in our industry, who, by the way, he writes a series of occasional essays. I pretty much devour every one he writes. They're amazing. And he's been doing this forever. He's a former engineer that just really understands a lot. And he pointed out this, what Brian would said, but he immediately said, but I sure hope people don't think this means micromanaging. But of course, they ignored all that. And that's what people think. But I talk to so many people, and they are missing the point of what is really being said. And it is a very important point. So what I wanted to do was to double click on that and talk. I kind of have to share this because we're not trying to represent everybody. We're not trying to talk about how everybody does product. We literally just created SVPG just to share what we see in the best companies. And we're the first ones to admit that most companies do not work like the best companies. There are plenty of other resources if you want to figure out how Bank of Wherever works. That's not what we do. So we're all about sharing those practices. And that's, we don't want to apologize for that because that's our whole purpose. So it's important to keep that in mind because that's what's driving this. So let's talk about why is this topic. I should also say, you might have noticed, I don't refer to this topic as founder mode. I'm reframing somewhat as founder style leadership. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, I mean, Paul Graham is a former developer. And not only a developer, he was a Lisp developer. If you know your software languages, it's all about, modes. And founder style leadership is not a mode. It's not like a founder switches into founder mode and switches out of founder mode. So it's not a mode, technically. It's a style of leadership, number one. Number two, it's not just founders. In fact, I would argue that founder style leadership becomes more important the larger your company, not less. And I'm going to show you how all of the major product model companies figured that out a long time ago. And that's part of how they institutionalize their leadership development. So that's why this topic is so important. Now, we know micromanagement is not the answer. We've known this forever. And to be fair, nobody actually comes out and says like founder mode means micromanagement. Nobody who knows, even Brian Chesney doesn't say that. None of them were saying that. They're just saying what it's, that professional management, in quotes, is not helpful. And we're going to talk about that. But I want to be clear that we all know the problem with micromanagement. I just think This is of all, there's dozens of quotes from major leaders. This is probably the canonical one. We don't hire all the engineers to tell them what to do. We hire them to show us what's possible, right? That is why. You don't micromanage the professionals. So we know that. So here's the thing though. It's not the opposite of micromanagement either. And that's where so many people get confused. Now, this goes by different terms, the opposite of micromanagement. Some people call it professional management, basically what you're theoretically taught in business school. Sometimes people call it laissez-faire management. It's like hands off. Sometimes people call it delegation style management. What Paul Graham was trying to do in this essay was point out that professional management model does not work in tech-powered companies. It doesn't work. And he was sharing, basically, Airbnb, they grew, and the board, and I don't doubt any of this. The board said to Brian, the co-founder, like, you're going to have to, bring in some professional, you've heard it, adult supervision, bring in some professional management. And the idea that you bring in good people and then hire good people and give them room to do their job sounds so nice. It's so not helpful. We know that it's not helpful. In fact, 30 years ago, I mean, literally, think about that. 30 years ago, Steve Jobs knew this because they made the same mistake at Apple. Because the same board, their boards, like you got to bring in professional managers. There's a whole great story there. And it didn't work. They knew how to manage, maybe, but they don't even know what the people are doing. And the sort of extreme example of that was literally bringing in from Pepsi. Scully didn't know the customers, didn't know the technology, didn't know the products, didn't know the culture, didn't know how we build product, none of that. Of course, they almost bankrupt the company to the point of bringing Steve Jobs back, which of course is the great story. But we know professional management is not much better. In fact, many of you, if you read, this was the theme of the book Empowered. It's talked about literally and inspired from before, but in Empowered, literally, to empower product teams, you don't need less leadership, you need better leadership. See, that's what it's trying to say. But in truth, this quote doesn't say what better leadership is. And that's what I really wanted to flesh out. Now, I would argue that's what the 400-page book says. That's the point, is to get people to read the book and learn how the role that product leaders play in enabling their teams to do good work. But when I coach companies and product leaders, this is probably, I'm a broken record to them. So, they somehow think that if they get too involved, they're breaking some rule and they shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, are you kidding? You need to do more of this. But that's not micromanagement. So what I want to try to really make clear is, what does this good style hands-on management look like? And why is it that so many, other companies have figured this out? You may know Leslie Kilgore, one of the original leaders at Netflix. And they understood this from the beginning. They understood this point. And so the idea is we lead with context, which is short for strategic context. This is a way of describing what I would call founder-style leadership. But the point is not micromanaging, control, command and control. It's not that. We'll talk about more about what it is. But now what I wanted to do is talk for a minute about what's so special about founders. Because there is something special about founders. And I'm long on record. I think being at least once in your career as a product person to be able to start a company. Now, it's not for everybody, because it is a lifestyle thing. It is not for everybody. But it is, I don't know anything that replicates that experience. I just don't. And so what does it really mean? this is why it's so important. The founders have been there since the beginning. They were the beginning, typically, right? That's why they're the founder. They created the product vision, and they have probably given that pitch thousands of times to basically anybody who will listen. They will do it. They are the vision. They personify that vision. Think about this. They know about every customer interaction. It's a startup especially. They know about all the deals. They know about all the prospects. They know about all the deals they lost. They have ideas about why they lost them. They know about every experiment that was done, whether they were graded experiments or not. They know what happened, what worked, what didn't work. They have ideas for why it didn't work. They learned. Nobody else has that. They've been immersed in the market. They've literally been living it in that market, in that industry. It's, I did 2 startups in my career, as well as, actually, I'm going to come back to my eBay story, because I was not a founder at eBay. I sure wish I was. But I was brought in by the co-founder, Pierre Omidyar, and my first order of business as a product leader was to pick his brain and try to get everything I could to know as much of this as possible. We'll come back to that. But the founder, it's hard to replicate. Now, of course, none of this says whether the person is a good leader or a good manager. No, that's not it. That's not this at all. That's orthogonal point. But this is what makes a founder so special. Now, there are different kinds of founders generally. I mean, some companies just one founder, but there's often 2 or 3 co-founders. And I'm really talking here about the product co-founder. So a typical, we were talking about Paul Graham, typical Y Combinator company. There's a product co-founder, and then there's some like sales or finance co-founder. And the 2 of them kind of team up. The other founders have interesting insights too, but the product co-founder is the one I'm really referring to here. All right, so let's talk about what we mean by founder-style leadership. Now, what makes them so amazing is what I just described. This is what we mean by product sense. Product sense. I'm going to double-click on that. But product sense is what you earn by doing all those things I just described. That's what you earn. That's what you learn. Some people think product sense is an innate thing. I think that's never been true. It's easy to sort of, I'm not one of those people or something like that. That's not true in my experience. It is something that you can absolutely learn if you do the things we'll talk about. But what makes a founder special is they have developed this product sense. I would also argue what makes any product manager or product leader special is they have also developed this product sense. And that becomes the goal. We're going to talk about this. So let's really double click on what is founder style leadership. And there's really 2 situations we have to talk about, 2 different cases. And you'll sort of see where the Brian Chesney problem came from here. The first is a startup. Just defining loosely here as pre-product market fit. That's how I define it. There's different ways. Pre-product market fit. It's sort of a different game when you're pre-product market fit. It's very small. Honestly, it's to me the most fun. It's also the most stressful, but it's the most fun. Really, there's only one goal: to get to product market fit before the money runs out. That's it. On the other hand, once you get to product market fit, it's sort of a different game. Now the case we're talking about is for scale up or for a large company. And so we're going to talk about those 2 situations, because there is a real inflection point that happens, that needs to happen once you get product market fit. If you're lucky enough to get to product market fit and skilled enough, then you get that other problem to have. Okay, so let's talk about the startup case first. In the startup case, and you probably know this, in a typical startup, pre-product market fit, there are no product managers. The product co-founder is the product manager. Now, there's some exceptions to that. like in the case where the co-founders, none of them are a product person. Now, a lot of the VCs I know, and Y Combinator's one of them, they're like, we're not going to fund you unless you find a product co-founder. And they'll often do some matchmaking and make sure they have that person there, because they know without that, the chances of success are really slim. So in the startup case, the product manager, the product founder is the product manager. And that's why it's typically the upper bound on a startup, it's not that big. There's only so many engineers and stuff that product manager that product founder can play the product manager role with. So it's small. One of the nice things about startups is the company is the product team. Product team is the company. We all know what everybody's doing and going on, and there's that singular focus. So what powers the founder, the product founder? It's the product sense. That's how they make decisions. That's why they are out there with customers every day. They are on top of everything that's being tried. They're right there. A lot of times when I coach startups, I am coaching the product founder in just some of the techniques they can use to help them do this as fast as possible. Because in a startup, there usually is a very real sense of urgency, mostly because of the money. And there's a burn rate that a startup has, and they can calculate how much time they really have. So product sense powers the decisions. But in a startup, it's so small. They are the team. So there's not a whole lot of other stuff going on. Now, what changes is in the scale-up or enterprise case. So imagine you're a founder, and you've spent the last year or two really getting to product market fit, or however long it is, and now the thing, VCs, almost, not all of them, some of them are early seed stage, but most of them, they want to see product market fit. They want something they believe if they add money, they could grow it like crazy. And that's scale-ups. That's the larger companies. So in that case, the objective is now to enable multiple product teams to do great work, to make real results, achieve real outcomes. That's different. You don't have that when you're a startup because you are the team. That's it. So that's why there is a new skill that's required. And this is specifically what I spend a lot of time with, especially with scale-ups, is because they don't know that the founder is like, this is not scaling. I don't know how. I cannot do what I was doing pre-product market fit with 8 product teams. It's just the math doesn't work. There's not enough hours in a day. So what are they supposed to do? There's actually 2 possible answers. Only one is good. The more common answer is that somebody sells them on a process to scale. And a lot of them fall for that trap, especially if they're not technical. They think the answer, because that's what the process people will tell you. The way we scale this is we formalize this process and we make it a repeatable thing. That's a whole other talk. I think I've probably spent at least a few years of these meetups and talking about literally, this is a Steve Jobs quote, the disease of process people. That's his words. If you think he felt strongly about this, the disease of process people. This is the alternative process. The other way, only way I know that really works, is through coaching. And this is the missing piece. This is like, I so wish when Brian Chesney was in that, like, this is not scaling. Now, in truth, he created quite a mess when they were growing, and he hired people and made some mistakes. So he created a lot of the mess he was in, but he did realize at some point he had a problem. I wish I was there to talk to him about, you need to share what you learned when you were the founder, had a product with the leaders so that they can do this job. Micromanaging is not the answer. And he's not even trying to micromanage. He's just trying to do it all himself. And so he is the bottleneck for the place. And if you've heard, it's not a great solution. So coaching is the key. And I want to point out that this applies not just to a founder or CEO. This applies to every layer of management. So this is what we need to talk about. Okay, in terms of coaching and why it's such an integral part of founder-style leadership, many of you may recognize, by the way, Bill Campbell, he was for a while CEO of this very company, Intuit. He was on the board for many years. He was also literally the coach for Steve Jobs and Larry and Sergey at Google and Jeff Bezos at Amazon. The guy is like, I mean, there's literally a book written about him called $1 Trillion Coach, because he, by now, he's like, what, a $10 trillion coach if you were to, but he created so much value. But this is what he was preaching. Coaching is no longer a specialty. You cannot be a good manager without being a good coach. So think about that. Why does he even bother to say that? Because that is the key to scale. So I want to make some other points, and then I want to show you where so many places this often goes wrong. They don't get this. So this is not a new thing. I just want to emphasize, it's not a new thing. The term is new, but this realization of what's needed is not. At Amazon, and by the way, these are all, you can see this publicly. Go to the leadership principles, Google leadership principles for each of these companies. You'll see this because they're all brag about this. At Amazon, dive deep. Now you'll see that theme. Founder-style leadership involves going deep with the teams, not micromanaging, but going deep, like asking hard questions, demanding good answers. If they don't know how to give you the answer, you teach them the techniques so that they can get that answer. This is very hands-on. That's what they mean at Amazon by dive deep. Hire and develop the best. Development is coaching and focus on results. How about at Apple? Deep expertise. There's that depth. Immersing in the details. Same point. Scaling through teaching and coaching. Honestly, I don't know a company that's done that better in terms of developing an amazing bench of product leaders. How about at Google? Substance first. Develop others through coaching. Empower your team. Focus on outcomes. The leadership principles of, and not just those companies, but those are three of the iconic ones, are remarkably consistent. Now, you could argue it's probably because of Bill Campbell. Literally. It's probably he gave him the origin for a lot of these things. But I would also argue they're things that every one of these companies learned and they understood. Airbnb just learned the same sort of lessons. They just haven't taken it as far yet. Okay, so there is a prerequisite to good leadership. And this is, honestly, I never even would have thought to have to say this, except I do a lot of business, a lot of work in Europe. And in Europe, they have this, I mean, we all have our problems. We have plenty of them here. But in Europe, there's kind of two things that I have to completely blow up if I'm going to help a company. Number one, the addiction to process. They are so addicted to process. And this is a disease, like I said. The other, and this is not as common as the addiction to process, but boy, is it toxic. They have this idea of a people-only manager. You heard of this before? This is a manager, like an engineering manager or a product director that actually doesn't know anything about engineering or doesn't know anything about product. They are people only, they call them. People only, meaning HR-like. Meaning like they hire, they make sure their salaries are administered. But if you have a question about like, go talk to go talk to another engineer or something like that. To me, that is the most ridiculous idea. I don't know. I can't imagine how anybody would think that was a good thing. So at these companies, this is actually literally one of the mantras at Apple, experts lead experts. You do not, if you got a team of engineers, you do not have somebody who, their issue is not, the office. Their issue is they want to become a great engineer, a great designer, a great product manager. So one of those first principles is experts lead experts. Should be obvious, but it's really not. This is so critical. And of course, in Silicon Valley, that for forever, as far as I can know, I mean, I've been doing product in Silicon Valley for 45 years, almost 45, just crazy long time. And it was way before me. This was the model that if you wanted to be an engineering leader, you better be a pretty good engineer. It seems so obvious, but a lot of people go sideways on that. That's so super dangerous. So prerequisite for good leadership is that you know what you're leading. You know the subject. Believe it or not, I get lots of arguments in Europe on that, and I just like, I have to be very blunt with them. It's just like, you need to, and it's also not hard to convince them to at least do a test. And let's talk about the other model and why. All right, so what does founder style leadership look like in practice? So first of all, we assign problems to solve rather than features to build. It's kind of the foundation. And if you've read any of my writing, you'll see those phrases all over. That's what it means to be an empowered team. You're given a problem to solve, and you get to figure out the best way to solve it. And you discuss with the team not only the problem, make sure they understand the problem, but the outcome. Like, how is success defined? That's like if you're a team working on something, you need to understand the problem and you need to understand the goal. And remember, in an outcome organization, the goal is not shipping, right? The goal is solving the problem. So then we have a discussion with the leaders about, like, how are we measuring this? Are we measuring this by revenue? Are we measuring this by some other KPIs? What are we measuring? So that's the beginning. Second, you prepare. I was one of my favorite product leaders is actually a longtime engineering leader, CTO, famously the CTO of Etsy for many years, and now the CEO of MyFitnessPal. It's a terrific CEO, a guy named Mike Fisher. And I was chatting with him, and he was just finished preparing for a one-on-one, and he was mentioning he'd been working on a set of questions he wants to ask. So it's very intentional. Good leaders, it's very intentional. They're thinking through. He knows what they need to be doing, but he doesn't want to tell them what to do. He wants them to learn this and take ownership of this. Of course, the minute you tell somebody what to do, they're like, okay, just tell me what to do. But if it doesn't work, it's not on me, it's on you, right? So that's not what we want. So he was taking the time to think through what are the right questions to make, that help that person think and focus on the right topics. And then you expect good answers. That doesn't mean you always get good answers, but you know what a good answer is, and you also know what a BS answer is. Because again, experts lead experts, right? They know. And so if it's not a good answer, it's like, okay, you need to understand that's not a good answer. And we need to talk about how will you come up with a good answer? How? Do you know the techniques? And then that's where coaching comes in. It's like, all right, this person maybe has never faced this before. They've never tackled this kind of risk in product discovery. They've never done a product strategy before. Most of the people I work with that are product leaders that are transforming to the product model, they have never done a product vision, a real one. They have never done a product strategy. It's not their fault, by the way. They were in feature team organizations which don't have those. They just exist to serve the business units, the stakeholders. So they don't even do those things. So they need help. If you've never done a product strategy, if you've never done a product vision, you don't even know really what you're supposed to do there. So I can ask those questions. I know what it's supposed to look like. There's any number of variations that would work, but I know it's got to have these characteristics. And I know that if they're not doing certain things, how are they going to get these answers? So I can ask, like, okay, where did this come from? Do you have this data? No. Okay, how can you get this data? Let's talk about that. Maybe we run some tests. Maybe run some experiments. So you need to demand solid answers. And, when necessary, help them learn how to get those answers. That's really coaching. And it's normal. It should be normal. In good companies, it is normal, but in most companies, they don't have somebody pressing and helping and pushing on this. But it is critical. And then, your job is to empower the teams, but your job is not just like hands off. Your job is to make sure they have the skills to succeed. So that's an every week thing. Are they, if they're making progress or not. That's why the weekly one-on-one is, to me, it's absolutely non-negotiable. Now, as you get more senior, you don't need to do it so much, but I'm talking about coaching individual contributors especially. That weekly one-on-one is where most of this happens. All right. So how do you develop this product sense? Now I'm talking about not only for the founder, real founder, but also for the leaders developing it in his or her people. How do you develop product sense? And for many years, I refer to this as doing your homework. I mean, you have to prepare for the job. And I've long told people that the most important phase for a new product manager is their first 3 months. And that is because that's when you're supposed to learn this. And I don't care how good you are, actually. I don't even care what company. You might have come from the best name. Maybe you've got 5 years at each of those 3 big kind of companies. You still will need to onboard because you don't know your company's culture. You don't know your technology. You don't know your customers. You don't know how decisions are made. You need to learn these things. So what does it mean to develop this product sense? First of all, you've got to get out and meet users and customers. And I really mean this at every level right now. Individual contributor, absolutely. Product manager for sure. And then all the way up to a head of product. And I did every one of these things when I was brought on as the first head of product and design for eBay. But remember, the co-founder, Pierre, was really the first one. So my job was to learn this stuff. And I had to figure out, because it was already, he had got to product market fit and the place was growing like crazy. But I needed to figure out what was important to what was there and what was just incidental and they haven't even got around to fixing it. Now, most heads of products, they don't develop this product sense. So the result is they're scared to death to do anything. They don't want to break things. And people are scared they're going to break things. So the way you're not is to do this, to build that product sense. So it starts by really going out. I mean, I had to go learn all about the buyers and the sellers. It's really the sellers were really special breed, especially early internet. We spent countless hours really getting to know the sellers, getting to know the buyers, getting to know their issues. Spend time with the engineers. One of the things that I encourage leaders to do, including, by the way, CEOs, is to skip level, meet individual contributor engineers, spend time with them. It's an amazing thing. Not only does it really build morale and build sense of ownership, but it is so critical that the leaders get this understanding that you get from the engineers. As you may know, if you move to the product model, the engineers play a much more prominent role. All you have to do is look at all the companies successfully deploying Gen AI-based products right now. Where do you think most of these ideas even came from? The engineers, who were the first ones to start prototyping with these things. So you got to spend time with the engineers. You have to immerse with the product data. There's no other way to do it, I know. You've got to immerse with the data. There's lots of data too. There's data on how people are using our products. There's data on how they buy our products. Sort of Salesforce.com is where most of it lives. And then we have to look at how that data changes over time, which is usually in some form of data warehouse. But you have to immerse in the data to really understand. The first one is telling us how they really use our products qualitatively. But the third one is how they use the products quantitatively. All right. You also, and this is where politics comes in, but you got to earn the trust win the hearts and minds, earn the trust of the stakeholders. And we do that by engaging directly, sincerely, one-on-one with each stakeholder. Now, in that time, you're learning what are the things you're worried about? What are the constraints? What do I need to know so that you're comfortable that I won't try to launch something that is going to damage the business or damage our partnerships? Or I remember actually at eBay, the hardest one for me was legal, because there were some big legal and tax agreements that were created so that basically it wouldn't be valued as an e-commerce company, and instead it would be valued as a marketplace. For those that know a little accounting, that's a big deal. And so I had to learn all of these, there's basically a whole judgment from the IRS that I had to read and understand so that we never did anything to put the entire economics of the company at risk. So I had to basically earn the trust, which was really about doing my homework. I had to learn these things. And then for actually several months, whenever anything was anywhere near that gray area, I would go to him. His name was Rob Chestnut, the only lawyer at the time early on, and say, like, Rob, this is sort of in that gray area. I'd love for you to take a quick look at it. Immediately, he would thank me, because, of course, it's much better for him if he could see a prototype before than deal with a fire later. And after a while, he was like, yeah, I think you understand this. So unless you have something really weird, you're good. But it took a while to earn that trust. But that's part of the product sense. And then, of course, there's always good and bad analysts for every area. There's some great analysts out there today. You want to consume the content. You want to really, and in many cases, build relationships with the right analysts so that you can ask them questions and they can ask you questions, so that you get that better understanding of the industry. And then if there's any way humanly possible, I'm a big advocate for finding a way to spend real time with the founder. Even though in many cases, as a product leader, founder is retired or checked out, they're on another business, they're doing something else. They've sort of cashed out. That's often the case once you're getting bigger, right? And in that case, I mean, literally reaching out, asking a board member or CEO, can you introduce me to the original founder? I want to get a big brain dump of everything. I've never heard, sometimes there's bad feelings in there, but usually the founder will do this. They understand. And we want as much of that as we can. Okay. So let's talk about founder-style leadership. What it really means is product sense plus coaching. That's what it really means at scale, right? If you're just an early pre-product market fit startup, it's really the product sense. There's nobody to coach really, and that's the nice thing when you're a true startup. It's a totally flat organization. But once you start growing, that's the key, is to share the learnings and make sure your people are developing that sense. I tell the product leaders that they will be judged by their weakest product manager. And what I'm trying to say there is your job is to make sure every one of the product managers has this knowledge. Because think about it. They're on an empowered product team. They've got the cost of a designer, a cost of a set of engineers. And if that product manager does not know what they're doing, can't make good decisions, it's just throwing away money. So your job as a product leader is to make sure your people have these skills. Another recent product therapy podcast was, we actually turned the tables a little bit. My partner, Chris, interviewed Christian because Christian had created the best onboarding program any of us had seen at his last company that he had transformed. And it was a special onboarding program for really for all members of a product team. And Chris was interviewing him on how he created and set up that program. And it was all about not just getting people up to speed, but getting the executives to actually trust them. It's pretty ambitious, but critical, especially in an organization like theirs, which was sales is the top dog, right, in a lot of those enterprise software companies. And so sales, if they didn't trust the product teams, there would be big problems. All right. So, yeah, you know about the books. Transformed is now really, that's something that changed, I guess, in the last year. We kind of realized, because a lot of people had not read any of the books, and so people were reading them in a different order. And we sort of found that Transformed is probably the best entrance to this. And then at any level, and then if, depending on your job, if you're a product leader, empowered, if you're a product manager, inspired. But Transformed is really written for anybody in the company, and it's much more at those foundational principles. So that's one learning that might be useful if you haven't read any of them, or if you're looking at, one of the things that's the best part to me is so many senior leadership teams, and I'm actually talking some Fortune 50 companies where the entire C-suite has read Transformed, and they're like all talking about it, and then they want to talk, and that's good. Okay, that's good for sure. All right, Dan, think we have time for questions still? I'm hoping we do.
Definitely, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk today. I had a couple of questions.
Great.
The first one is, when you said experts lead experts,
Yes.
There are different types of expertise, right? If you are a product leader, you can have expertise in product management, and then there is domain expertise.
Good point.
So would you think that you have to be a domain expert also when it comes to being a product leader?
Great question. Let's do that one first, because I'll forget it if you go to the next one. So domain expertise is a different thing. And I was talking about functional expertise, just to be clear. So yeah, I mean, if you're managing designers, what that's referring to is you better be a good designer. Now, domain expertise is still an interesting question, but it's a nuanced thing. Domain expertise, by the way, is part of product sense. I mean, if you don't know, like, then you won't even understand your customers, right? You have to learn. But that's, we're always careful there. You may know this. In fact, the best write-up on this topic I've ever seen is from Shreyash Doshi. Some of you, if you don't know Shreyash, where have you been? Yeah. He is brilliant, brilliant. And he wrote a piece about confusing domain expertise with domain dogma. That's the problem with domain expertise. People think you're not supposed to do this. This is really a problem in financial companies, especially because there's so many compliance rules and all this stuff. And people they don't even know what things are really law and which things are just lore, right? That's how we've always done it. And so, but no, you don't have to do that. I can't tell you how many people think, oh, we're not allowed to do continuous deployment because our company has compliance. You can absolutely do that. In fact, if you really care about it, you will. So there's just a lot of this confusion. So the true domain expertise is when you pull out the dogma. So this is another thing we actually coach people on. So no. Now, sometimes what we're working on has got some real, like say a surgical device. I was actually advising a company that does surgical. I don't know anything about that. But they had one of the best surgeons in the world on their advisory board, and he played that role. When a team had a question about domain, he was right there. So that was his thing. And actually Intuit. You're not expected to be a tax expert as a product manager. You have access to tech specialists. Same idea.
Got it. Thank you.
Good.
The second one that I had was about product sense, that you spoke about how you would, at the beginning of the company, when you join a company, the things that you would do to come up to speed and be very productive in what you do. I've been in both large enterprises and smaller companies and startups. One of the problems that I encounter with larger companies, especially in a growing product team, there is a fatigue when a new product manager reaches out to do the same thing, and then another one comes in and tries to do the same thing, reach out to the stakeholders, talk to the leaders, want to talk to users often. there is a resistance that I see is like, oh, do we have to do this again? But I do see that as a must do for
Yeah.
a product manager.
Yeah,
How do
but
we?
let's double click on this because, first of all, we coordinate so that we're not hitting up the same customers all the time. Super easy, super basic. User research usually makes sure that there's a little common sense applied so we're not like all going to the same people. So that's easy. Stakeholders, we're not all, first of all, there's different levels, right? So that the product leaders need to establish it with the leaders in the stakeholder area, and then individual contributor product manager may have one or two stakeholders in the line of business that they're working with, and they will create. So you're not going to the same stakeholders. And when you do have something, which is they're part of the onboarding program. So they'll come and you'll introduce them, the product leader will introduce them and sort of tell them a little bit, and they'll let that person describe a bit, because they're doing a one-to-many thing, which is much more efficient. I've done those programs at everywhere I've worked. You know, you get batches every quarter of new people, you put them through. So just a little bit of planning goes a whole long way.
One thing you mentioned was that addiction to the process is a problem.
Yes.
How would you go about helping a product leader who's addicted to the process understand that's a problem? Asking for a friend here.
Yeah. Yes. Honestly, if it's a new product leader, that may have been a real hiring mistake. Of course, we want to be careful when we're recruiting that product leader because they are the linchpin for this stuff. You know, a lot of times product leaders say, oh, it's the CEO. The CEO is not driving it, you know, it's never going to work. CEOs have not done this in most cases. They are depending on their product leader. So you do have to make sure you've got a product leader that can succeed, and that's really what we're interviewing for. If make sure they've either been there, done that, that's the best, or we get them coaching. Product leadership. A lot of times the product leader either is new and doesn't have the experience, or more often, they've been there a while. People think that person is very good. They usually are, but they don't have the experience. So a product leadership coach will help them. And one of the first things they would do is disabuse them of the notion that process is going to solve any of this. To be honest, the scenario you're describing is more common with the engineering leader than the product leader. And there it's a little more sensitive because sometimes they do know it, they've done the right thing on the product side, but the engineering, they're kind of, the CEO's scared to touch because, they're sort of like held hostage there. So that can be a tricky one. Sure.
A question I had, if I want to learn more about this distinction between process and coaching, which of your resources or books should I go look at?
Well, when you say the distinction between process, the two different ways.
Yes.
Yeah, empowered. In fact, that's right at the front. It says those are the two ways to go. Yes. If you've been following the whole SAFE thing, that's sort of the antithesis of the product model. I don't know any product companies that use it, but there are a lot of big IT-style companies that use it for sure. And that is that path. It's not the only one that's that path, but that's like the poster child for that path. And unfortunately, the agile community is splintered. And some are true to the principles and they totally get this stuff. Other ones have really gone hard in the process direction. So it's not enough to know if they're agile or not. You have to look deeper to see what they mean by that.
I'm gonna take a couple from Zoom real quick. So
Sure.
Jay says, have you found ways to talk with senior managers in enterprise companies that make them more receptive to getting started with product model adoption?
Absolutely. First of all, that is subject to the book Transform.
Right.
So that would be a case to read. But there is one of the things we've really been trying to shine a light on. I'm just trying to think of how long I should take to answer this. This is a big topic, actually, because let me frame it this way. A lot of people think the best way to transform a large organization is to make a series of small changes, which honestly, there's a logic to that. That's kind of what we believe for software when you release, right? A series of small changes is much better than a big bang release. It turns out, though, that now we're going to talk politics. The moment you start a transformation, there is a clock that starts ticking. And if you don't show real results, I mean meaningful results, before that clock runs out, it's game over, basically. They'll go hire McKinsey or they'll go do something like that. So you have got to be smart about this. And it turns out it's actually much more likely to succeed. It's also much more responsible, much safer, much faster to do pilot teams. In a pilot team, instead of trying to change the whole organization a little bit at a time, we take one or a very small number of product teams. You got to be careful on this. You have to pick the teams, make sure they have the skills, set them up to succeed, give them a very ambitious objective, but not impossible objective. You don't want to set them up to fail, but it has to be that if they succeed, people are like, wow, we probably couldn't have done that before, right? So you have to be smart about this. The benefit to a pilot team is then they can show big improvements instead of just these little things. And it's low risk and it's low cost because it's just one or two teams. You know, these big companies, they have hundreds of teams. So this is basically an experiment, this is really what we say. It's running the transformation as a product rather than as a project. Because that's what most people do is as a project. They say, we've got all these things to do. We're going to retrain everybody this month, and then we're going to, it's really not likely to succeed. Instead, what we need to do is show our own teams and our executives what good looks like. And the best way we know to do that is with a pilot team. It can be 2 or 3 teams, but really not much more than that. Now, they run typically for a quarter, maybe 2, and hopefully demonstrate real outcomes. I was just talking to one of my favorite product coaches that was working with a company in Mexico, and in 1 quarter, they got a 40% boost to revenue. I was like, even the head of sales, which was the most skeptical leader in their company, was like, I love you, kind of thing. Because I mean, like they couldn't touch that. Nothing they had done in years had touched that. But you know, this team started doing real product work. They went out, talked to customers, they tested ideas. They showed real results. And then even the head of sales was like, how fast can we roll this out? Right? That's the thing. So politically, you have to show results quickly. That's a reality. It's a much safer, much easier, much more responsible way to do that when you constrain it to a pilot team.
I've had a lot of success with pilot teams. One thing I've found is, as you know, like when you get multiple teams, you get cross-team dependencies. And so this one team is all ready to go, and then they have dependencies on other teams. You know what I mean? So
this is part of picking that team. So I literally, there was one company I was on a call with, and they had a favorite team, but it was dependent on a tech debt area that was not years. It's like, that is not a good choice, right? What are they going to be able to do? They're not able, they're not empowered, they're not autonomous. No. So let's be smart about this. That's a dependency. Let's factor that in. And they went to another area.
You just said it. I was thinking autonomy. Degree of autonomy should be one of the selection criteria, basically, right?
Yeah, you want to set them up to succeed as much as you can. They still have to do the work, but obviously if they can't do anything without a major rewrite of a replatforming thing, then that's going to be a big problem.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, another question from Zoom. Hadriana says, when interviewing for a product role, how can someone identify a leader or company who is or provides good coaching?
Oh, that's a great question, and that, by the way, is the right question. If you're interviewing, I think this is the most important thing. You can learn a lot, by the way, on LinkedIn, and I strongly encourage people to do that. In fact, I'll go a little further. You heard me talk about some companies that are pretty famous for coaching, but I will tell you, at each of those companies, not all managers are created equal. Some of the managers are awesome coaches. Other ones didn't get the memo. So you want to make sure that you are not, that you're working for somebody who really is. Now, one way is, like I said, LinkedIn, look where they work. But also, and I do encourage, this should be a conversation. And I coach people to say, look, go in there. First, your first order, obviously, as a candidate is to convince them that you're pretty awesome. and that you will work very hard to make this great. But then once you feel like you've done that, is to say, okay, the truth is I'm here because of you. I want to work for you. I have heard that you are great, and I want somebody to help me become great. Now, most managers, that's what they want to hear, honestly, right? They want to hear that. They want somebody that is gonna really cares about the job and is gonna really put a real effort in. I remember the person who coached me on product, the first thing he asked is he wanted to get a sense if I was serious about putting in the work. Otherwise, he wasn't gonna put in the extra effort. And I absolutely was. And I was so grateful because he had agreed to coach me and had this great reputation. And I'm like, yeah, anything. And he had all these rules, all these things I had to do. But I immediately saw that I should have known a lot of those things myself, but I didn't.
All right, cool. One other one, just get ready for the softball. You ready for the softball lob? Is safe a red flag?
Somebody's just playing with us there. Yeah.
I don't think they are, but yeah.
Yeah, safe is not safe. That's right. Yeah. And it's not just safe today. There's a big, like I said, a big move in this process direction by a lot of people. And so, no, it's really incompatible with the kind of principles we're talking about. The role of product managers, the role of designers, especially the role of engineers. It's all big planning up front. It's so not. The irony is, it's not only not product model, it's not agile at all. It's only agile in marketing, name only. There's no agile there at all. None of the principles. So, yeah. No.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting because I view it as like this security blanket that gets sold to big companies so they can say they're agile, right?
Well, here's what's really going on, in my opinion. Big companies, it's safe is a process that's optimized for predictability,
right,
as is all waterfall processes. That's its real attribute. Product companies are trying to optimize for innovation or outcomes. They're completely different. That's why they're just like two different, a fork in the road. Are you going to go for outcomes or are you going to go for predictability? At Spotify on the wall, they have these signs which say 100% predictability equals 0% innovation. And it really is true. And the irony to me is, yes, that's true, but you know what? The predictable approaches are not very predictable. They're really not. It's based on a fallacy, but the CIO looks at it and says, that sounds like a reliable, predictable thing.
Yeah, to say another way, predictability doesn't guarantee you're going to actually create customer value because they're all focused on outputs instead of outcomes.
That's right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marty, for the talk today. Really appreciate it. I had a question that was sort of the opposite of the interview one about hiring. So as a hiring manager or, in the past, as you've done this, what are some of the key things that you look for to gauge the product sense in a candidate?
Oh, yeah, great. Well, I mean, I'm just thinking I've probably written a half a dozen articles, too, about things to look for in here as you're interviewing for leaders. Because that's where I spend a lot of my time is with the leaders. And I'm on a lot of interview teams for these companies. So anyway, what I'm looking for, do they know this stuff? What did they do in their last job? How did they develop a product sense? How did they develop that product sense? What have they learned about product? How insightful are they? Are they somebody that's just like looking for a playbook, looking for a recipe, looking for a framework? Or there's somebody that understands it's really a job about thinking? And you need this information in order to have clear thoughts on this. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking for, unless they're a brand new college hire, which they don't then have any kind of real record yet. And we're looking for, we're really looking for, I actually think for many, many years, and I think there are parts of Google that still do this, but for a long, long time, if you wanted to apply for a product manager position at Google, they wanted you to be able to show that you've learned at least two parts of a business, at least two. Like it could be marketing and analytics or some, any two. And their logic was, if you've learned two, you'll be able to learn the rest. But if you're not even one of those people that cares enough to learn any of them, then you may not be. So that's another useful thing to kind of look at. And that's what I'm not expecting them to be experts in these areas, but you can tell somebody that just has really studied it enough to know the nuances, know what's hard, know it's non-trivial stuff. If they assume all these other things if they assume anything is easy, it's a big red flag. Yeah.
Hey, Marty, thanks for the talk and all the great work that you've put out. My question has to do with product analytics teams or groups. Curious to hear from you, your thoughts, what you've seen, what works, what doesn't work, how to leverage them, how to use them in various kind of organizations.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's, well, first of all, we're talking, just to make sure we're on the same page. We're talking about the people that help product teams make decisions quantitatively. Super useful. We also have people that help qualitatively. That's usually the user research team. We love both. Today, in some companies, they've combined those two and called it product ops, which is fine. The most important thing is you have those people. Now, some companies have a lot of those people because they're consumer companies, tons of data. Some people only have a few of those people and they share them. So, they're not all the same. Even though I will say, because a lot of the crowd is product managers, just because you have a great product analytics person, data analytics person, that does not relieve you of the responsibility as product manager to really own that understanding of the data. This person is like your best friend, probably to help you understand what's going on, but it is not, you cannot abdicate to them.
I would just echo the other side too. Same thing, if just because you have a qual UX researcher, that doesn't abdicate the PM from.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that whole idea, the old days, we were really talking a long time ago, but you would just, user research was like an agency in-house, and they would run these tests, and 3 months later, you'd get a report. That is useless. And even then, the report was usually good, but everybody discounted it because they weren't there. So no, we don't do that.
Building on that, coming from the user research side, I see on one side of the spectrum, like product intuition, just purely making product decisions based on whether that be that expertise, domain expertise, whatever it might be. And then on the other side, just purely evidence-based decision making. And so on that spectrum, or if you disagree on whatever spectrum you prefer, where do you place product sense?
Good. That's a beautiful question, actually. I should write an article on that. I really do think that's a beautiful question. And it gives me a chance to sort of say why I really don't like that whole product intuition thing. I think it's red herring. I don't think it's a thing. I think there are people who have very good product judgment. What a coincidence. They have also developed product sense, right? That's what product sense is. It gives you that knowledge to have good judgment. It's not, and people talk about it's in their gut. No, it isn't. It's not in your gut. It's in your brain. You have talked to enough and you've assimilated all this different inputs and you have a very good sense. Good product leaders, they know where the market's going. They understand why users do what they do and why customers buy how they buy. They do that because they've talked to so many. So I personally reject intuition as a thing. And to me, and also I think, pure, you've seen data-driven versus, data-informed. Who really does that? People talk about it, but I think that's just like crazy. Data will tell you what's happening. You do some work and you can trust it. It'll tell you what's happening. It doesn't tell you why. And it doesn't tell you what to do. So it's just a data point and it feeds the judgment, but you have to make a choice. And a lot of times there's very good qualitative reasons to override the data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would just add a quick thing. I remember I was interviewing a designer and I asked him a question. How would you use analytics to assess the quality of your design after you launched it? And he looked at me with a look of horror on his face, like, if I designed it, then it's going to be great. So he had product intuition, so anyway. Speaking of it, I like that we're all talking about UX research. One question from Zoom from Vishaka. Basically, long story short, I'm a UX researcher. how can I get into becoming, a product manager? Like basically, how can what's your recommendations for people that are in UX research to branch into and get into product management?
Oh, there's a proud and long history of user research into product management. Also product design, into product user research into product design and product design into product management. This is all great. And I would say the person's probably coming at it from a very good place. That's a pretty good starting point, as is an engineer is a good starting point too. These are useful things. So you're certainly going to score a lot of points in terms of customer empathy and really having the willingness and knowledge to engage with them usefully. I would encourage that person to focus on their weaknesses. Focus on how are you on the financials? How are you on the technology? How are you on the other aspects of the business? Work on shoring those up and becoming a really good, well-rounded product manager.
Question is kind of a follow-up on a small discussion that we had about a year ago. Do you see any effect of growing adoption of LLMs basically in our life onto this whole transformational landscape? Because I remember you feared of a scenario that because LLMs are learning from prevailing knowledge, and the prevailing knowledge is probably by companies that are not doing product management the right way.
Yeah.
So this knowledge will bleed into decision making.
Yeah.
So do you observe any of this?
I mean, we've definitely seen that happen, but a lot's also gone on in the last year. I mean, by the way, just like a few weeks ago, published, what was it called? AI Product Management 2 years in. It was sort of a 2-year report. And it summarizes the latest of my thinking, at least, and also I think some of the latest research on this. And there is some really interesting, we know a lot more now. And it's like so many things, it's pretty nuanced. Certain people are getting very dramatic benefits. Other people are getting a whole lot and not much. So it really depends on your expertise. The big question, of course, is how does this impact the careers of all the people in the room, for example? And that's still a very hard question. I think that what we can say is that those that are the product owner, good luck. I don't see that. That is just not a future to me. I would be very nervous. Feature team product manager, also not great, because you're really project managing and there's a lot of help for that. I think what it really does, and what we're seeing so far, I mean, I'm hesitant to extrapolate too far because things are still changing so much, is these product managers, the ones that really are good at what we're talking about, their salaries have had a big bump because they are more important than ever. Because what does it really mean on these AI products is the judgment, the risks, it's harder. The liability, the consequences are bigger. So it's created more demand for product people that can do this. So I think we're going to see this sort of bifurcation, those that are, what's the right way to describe it? I'm very biased, of course, but the product managers like we're talking about, empowered product managers, I think are going to do well, but I think the other ones are going to struggle. Now, the same is already proving true for engineers, right? The junior ones, it's already hitting them. And all you have to do is read the paper every day, and you're seeing more companies deciding that they don't need more junior ones. They do benefit. That's the amazing thing is with the new tools, their most productive engineers are even more productive.
That was that research study from MIT that was awesome that you sort of cited. That was really cool. It was in material science, but it proved the case that the people that get the most out of the AI are the people that have, basically it said you need judgment and you need expertise in order to get the most out of it.
What we were calling product sense.
Exactly.
You develop that product sense and combine that with these tools, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I did talk a year ago early on, I need to do a new one, where my takeaway was basically Gen AI is great for divergent thinking, coming up with all these ideas, but not the judgment expertise piece of it.
Which is also that research argued the same.
Yeah, cool. And then next month, we got David Bland coming, how to test your product ideas with ChatGPT. So, all right.
Hi.
Hi, in that category of asking for a friend. So if you're a senior product leader of product management and join a company and then find that the engineering team is addicted to safe agile, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Well, just to be, I know it's after the fact, but boy, during the interview process, you do not want to miss that, right? You do not want to miss that. That is like an elephant in the room. So, yeah. But, and I would, I do encourage people to talk to the engineering leaders, because the relationship between product and engineering it's got to be like this. Now, a lot of times, I still haven't found a company that's actually happy with SAFe. So sometimes they've only seen the marketing stuff. They haven't really heard what's coming. But I'll also tell you the truth. When we talk to companies and they tell us, no, we're safe, we're like, don't waste your money with us. If you decide at some point that's not going to work for you, then feel free to come talk to us. But it's just not going to, there's just not an intersection there.
Thank you. So a few minutes ago, you were talking a little bit about that 100% predictability is, 0% innovation. When you're looking at large manufacturing historical organizations where you're trying, there's some of that for safety is really important. How can you encourage companies like that where, let's say in automotive, right, the cars still need to be safe, there's still a production process, but balancing that with the innovation arm for the technology space for that intersection, how would you advise to move forward in that space?
Yeah. And to be honest, this used to be harder to answer, but now we have, and it does pain me to mention his name, but we do have Tesla. And Tesla is awesome at what we're talking about. And they make cars, just like Toyota makes cars, but not like Toyota makes cars at all. Now, you have to understand there's a big difference between discovering and manufacturing. So this is the sort of irony. I started my career with 10 years out of hardware companies, so I love devices, all kinds of devices. They were making medical devices, they were making calculators, they were making personal computers. I love working on devices. The irony is, everything we talk about in product discovery and prototypes, risk, it's even more important with hardware because the cost of messing up is so much higher. You just gave a great example, safety. You do not want to find out when it's being tested with the government. Well, if that even happens in the future, probably not, right? But anyway, yeah, you want to make sure we're doing that in discovery. And so of all the companies I've ever been, the hardware companies do more discovery than anybody, just because they need to. So these are not incompatible concepts at all. Now, there is a stage where you have to decide, and that's why most hardware companies use what's called the train model, right? Where they have the train leaves the station every 6 months, every year, it depends on the company. And if it's not ready, fine, goes on the next train. But because they've got a manufacturing process, they've got a distribution process, they've got a whole lot of logistics to happen. And so you can't just be like changing that later. But it's definitely a thing, and it's beautiful. And honestly, Tesla is a great example. And the amount of new parts they design compared to traditional companies is orders of magnitude.
So my question is, you mentioned a lot about building relationships with different layers of people in the organization.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned you understand your users on different levels and then why they do what they do.
Yep.
So in all of these scenarios, there are people involved. So according to you and your expertise in the field, how much of studying human sciences do you recommend? Like behavioral economics or psychology or neuroscience in product management?
Okay. First of all, I think that would be a great area to somebody as a background, but I don't know that many people that do come from that. User researchers, on the other hand, much more common. So I would not expect a typical product manager to have all that much there. They would lean on just like with data science we were talking about, you have somebody who's probably had a dozen data analytics classes and they're bringing a lot of expertise, but the product manager needs to know how to use that. It's the same with qualitative. The product manager and the designer, they better know how to use that person. They don't have to be that person.
Not asking about safe, but in today's world where a lot of companies are hybrid or totally virtual, have you seen any process which are not like the bad side of process that is working? Like, can you share one or two examples of things that actually work?
You mean in the remote context?
In the remote context.
Yeah. I'm surprised that hasn't come up till now.
I'm too.
No, it's because this is a very big topic. But people don't like what I have to say about that. And honestly, I'm totally conflicted myself. Were you asking me about, somebody was asking me earlier today about, is there another book coming in? Only book I would like to do is a third edition of Inspired. Because of two things, Gen AI and remote work. And as you know, the last edition published in 2018, that was before those two things. And the problem is, well, Gen AI is a moving target for sure. But the bigger one is remote work. The truth is, and I'm going to be full disclosure, every one of the companies I advise is at least hybrid, if not fully remote. But I hate it. They hate it. Everybody hates it, actually, who's on the product teams. It is not great from a discovery point of view, from a collaboration point of view. It's hard enough to get people to collaborate the way they need to when they are co-located, but when they're remote, man, it's hard. If you want to know why so many leaders are doing the return to office, it's because this is what's hard. Delivery is not the problem. Sales is not the problem. Marketing is not the problem. Discovery is the problem. The innovation is the problem. There's, if you never saw that amazing video from Steve Jobs on the Lost interview, everybody should watch it. It's amazing. But he talks about the friction we need to get a good product and how product design, engineering, they need to argue. But you can only do that if you have this psychological safety. And you only really have that kind of relationship. It's hard. It's not impossible remote, but oh my gosh, I feel like it's so slow. People either give up on trying to have that healthy relationship and they just say, send me whatever you want me to build, which at that point is sort of game over as far as good product. Or they don't care that they're sounding like jerks. And then pretty soon people don't trust them and they're not willing to really share and work the way they need to. So the truth is the tools are not very good. They're just not. I'm waiting for the tools to get significantly better so that we can come close to replicating the magic that happens in person for remote. And the reason I'm conflicted is even before the pandemic, the companies I was working with right in Silicon Valley could not hire enough people that could afford to live here. So they were having to deal with this problem anyway. So I love getting access to talent all over the world. Love it, and I wouldn't trade that. But we don't have a good way to deal with it. So I don't have a good answer. So I feel like I'm waiting for that, and I just hope something happens and I could, feel good about sharing those techniques.
And I would just add in, Marty, I was working with the team recently that the company's 100% remote. And so you just don't even get the robustness of interactions between PM and engineering. It's all through documents and Slack.
Artifacts, that's what
it's like this person was sharing this PRD they wrote, and they had prioritized it. I'd given advice on prioritize it. And then they're like, yeah, and the engineering manager got me an estimate. And they shared what the person said. Hey, it's going to take 1 or 2 months. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, how many minutes of a live conversation happened with you and the person just sheepishly said 0? Like it was all via documents.
So they have reverted to waterfall.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
exactly was just described,
Yeah.
right? So that's, as far as I'm concerned, as far as innovation, that's game over. We've lost.
Yeah.
So this is what we want to avoid. It's just hard. I have to spend more time coaching the people. I have to kind of force these interactions, and you have to spend time with people about why you have to stop, ignoring this person, or why you have to stop talking over this person, and the kind of things that are just rudeness that you don't have so much of in person. People, we have these visual cues, and anyway, it's a very difficult problem.
And my advice would just be, Slack is no substitute for actually talking to the person, right? You might start it on Slack, but if you think you're going to get some complex PRD, the team's going to understand what you wrote and scope it, there's no way. You've got to have
One thing I will say, because I meet a lot of teams doing exactly what you said. Somebody writes a PRD, throws it over a wall to an engineer, and they just say, okay, here's something. And of course, that is not what we want to do. And the minimum I tell them is, let's create a prototype and have all of us, the team, all talk about the prototype at the same time. Even if they take 30 minutes a day with the article's called Prototype of the Day. That's probably the most useful technique I have to facilitate this kind of dialogue. Still not that much, a little bit, but that is way better than throwing something over the wall.
Yeah, because they basically they'll go on Slack. Here's a link to my PRD. Let me know if you have any comments. Yeah. What happens? Everyone's busy. You get crickets. You get no comments. You assume silence equals consent, and 100% agreement and understanding, and it doesn't. And then anyway, yeah. So I would echo what you say. Like in the discovery space, have a freaking kickoff meeting. Make a Zoom meeting where you kick it off and say, okay, you probably all already read my PRD, I'm sure, but let's just go over the highlights just in case you didn't. And see if you have any questions. Right?
Or even better, don't do the damn PRD.
Exactly.
The PRD is setting all the wrong expectations there. Do the PRD after.
There you go.
Not before.
We have another question? Go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you, Dan, for organizing this. So my question is, there's a large rise of APM programs and new grad product managers right out of college. So you emphasize product sense and coaching. So do you think product management is a job that you transition into from a user researcher or an engineer, or is that something that can happen right away?
Oh, it can happen both. And by the way, I think APM programs, if everybody could be in an APM program, it would be such a great world. Because, what do you get in an APM program? A crash course in product sense and coaching. It's perfect. It's just that, as you know, companies that do that, they're kind of throwing their best talent at that. And so they kind of have a limited number of people they can get into it. And so they might hire 100 people, but only 5 get into the APM program, that kind of thing. But I love them. Now, that's not to be confused with an associate product manager, which I will be so surprised if that job even exists in a couple of years, because if anything is a target for ChatGPT, it's that. Yeah, that is just a sitting duck. Yeah.
So, most APM programs transfer into those full-time product management positions, right?
They're usually, there's different ways to do them, but most of the time, they are immediately a full-time product manager and not just anyone, on a serious area. But they have an unusual level of coaching support to make sure they don't, crash and burn.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for your great questions. Please join me giving Marty a round of applause here. Thanks, Marty. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you, sir. All right.